My son looked me in the eye and said, "You can't come to the baby shower, my wife wants it classy." He said it like I was something that needed to be brushed off his shoulder. Something cheap. Something inconvenient. Like my presence would stain their photographs. And for a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't have words, but because I couldn't believe I'd raised someone who could look at me like that. This was after I bought the crib, the stroller, the bassinet with the adjustable mattress. This was after I'd spent hours repainting the nursery in soft yellow, because they didn't want to know the gender. After I wired money for their rent when he lost his job. After I helped them put down the deposit on the house, my name was on that paperwork. And even after all that, he stood there and said I didn't belong. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. But that day, I heard something louder than yelling. I heard distance. I heard rejection. I heard the sound of something breaking inside me. Something I never thought he would touch. And so I smiled. I nodded. And I walked away. I didn't scream. I didn't cry, not in front of them. I simply closed the door behind me and sat in my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a baby shower. This was the moment my son decided I wasn't part of his new family. And the woman he married, the one I welcomed like a daughter, had made sure of it. They thought I'd stay quiet. They thought I'd keep giving, keep smiling, keep funding their fairy tale. But something inside me shifted that day. A part of me that had waited years for this chapter of my life. The chapter where I would finally become a grandmother. Finally be surrounded by warmth and family. That part stood up and chose silence. But not the kind of silence they expected. He wasn't an easy birth. 3 days of labor, and I still remember the doctor saying, "We might need to prep for emergency surgery." But I fought. I fought for him the way I fought through everything else in life. I was 19. Alone. His father was already gone. Left before we even picked a name. But I looked at that baby, red-faced and screaming. And I promised him he'd never feel unwanted. Not a single day of his life. I worked 3 jobs. Cleaning offices at night. Waitressing on weekends. Baking pastries at dawn for a hotel that barely paid me minimum wage. But it didn't matter. Because I had him. He was my reason, my rhythm, my reward. I never missed a parent-teacher conference. I never let him go to school without a hot breakfast. And even on days I couldn't afford to eat myself, I made sure his lunchbox was full. I taught him how to ride a bike, held him when he cried over scraped knees and bullies, sang lullabies when he couldn't sleep. He used to hold my hand and say, "You're the best mommy in the world." And I believed him. As he grew, I saw his potential. Sharp mind, kind heart, funny too. He had this way of making me laugh even on my worst days. When he got his first job, he bought me flowers with his own money. I still have the card. It said, "To the woman who made me everything I am." I read that card every birthday. Until recently. You see, all my life I imagined one thing. Watching my son become a father. Seeing him hold his own child. Watching him pass on everything good I saw in him. I imagined knitting tiny socks, helping name the baby, rocking my grandchild to sleep. That dream kept me warm through cold nights. But sometimes, dreams don't shatter all at once. Sometimes they crack slowly while you're too busy being proud to notice. The first time he brought her home, I was excited. She was beautiful, polished, polite in the way that makes you feel like she's interviewing you, but I wanted to like her. So I convinced myself she was just shy. I remember offering her my grandmother's stew recipe. She said, "Oh, we don't eat food like that anymore." And then she laughed like she didn't mean anything by it. But I felt something shift. I gave her space, bought her scented candles for her birthday, asked her what color she liked for the nursery. She smiled, but it never reached her eyes. She always looked at me like I was temporary, like I came with an expiration date. My son stopped visiting as much. He said he was busy. She needed him. And I believed him. Because that's what mothers do. We make excuses for our children when they start to pull away. We take scraps of their time and call it love. But the signs were there. He forgot Mother's Day. She accidentally sent me the wrong time for the ultrasound appointment. I sat in that waiting room for an hour before the nurse told me they'd already come and gone. When I called, he said, Sorry, I thought you knew. And that's when it really started sinking in. I was no longer welcome. Still. I bought the crib. Still. I painted the nursery. Still. I stayed silent. Because I thought love could fix it. That if I just kept giving, eventually I'd be seen again. I was wrong. It started with little things, small purchases I thought any excited grandmother would make. A baby blanket here, a white noise machine there. Then it was the crib. A solid oak one, not the cheaper particle board kind. I wanted something that would last. Something safe. Something beautiful. Something that said, this child is already loved. They didn't ask me to buy it. I offered. Gladly. Proudly. Because that's what I thought family did. Then came the stroller. She texted me a link. Isn't this the one with the best reviews? I clicked it. Nearly fainted. $1,200 for a stroller. But I told myself, this was my grandchild. So I paid. Quietly, and when it arrived they didn't say thank you. They posted a picture with the caption, blessed to have found the perfect stroller. No mention of me. I smiled through it. Then their rent was late. My son called, voice shaking. Mom, I hate to ask you this, but we're behind. Just for this month. It wasn't just this month. It was the next month too. And the month after that. Eventually, I stopped waiting for repayment. Eventually, I stopped being asked. It just became expected. When they started house hunting, I knew where it was going. He called me from the car. Said the bank required more for the down payment. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, my calculator blinking at me. I had saved that money for my own future. But I told myself, this is your son. This is your blood. What else would you spend it on? So I signed the papers. Put my name on that house because they couldn't qualify a loan. And for a brief moment, I was proud again. Proud to give them a fresh start. Proud to help them build a home. But something shifted. Once the house was theirs, I became invisible. Calls stopped coming. Invites faded. I wasn't asked to help decorate. I wasn't even shown around the guest room. The one I thought might be for me. Instead, I was thanked with silence. And from that point on, I wasn't family. I was a lender. Checkbook. A name on paper. But not a person. I never meant to overhear them. I had stopped by to drop off a box of newborn clothes I'd bought on clearance. Onesies, bibs, tiny socks. I rang the bell, but no one answered. So I walked around back. The sliding door was open just a crack. That's when I heard her voice. I'm sorry, but I just don't want her there. It's our baby shower. And honestly, she's embarrassing. Her voice was clear. Cold. Then she laughed. She tries so hard, like she's auditioning for a role she doesn't even fit. He laughed too. Not nervously. Not hesitantly. But comfortably. Like the two of them had rehearsed that conversation a dozen times. I froze. Every inch of me froze. I couldn't step forward. Couldn't retreat. So I stood there, gripping the handle of that little box of baby clothes like it was the only thing tethering me to earth. They moved on, talking about party themes and guest lists. Whether gold or ivory would be more elegant. But all I could hear was one sentence. She's embarrassing. It hit me like a slap. Because I remembered every moment I'd ignored. The time she told me not to post pictures of the ultrasound she sent me. The time she said, let's keep the guest list small. You wouldn't really know anyone anyway. The way she always used her smile like a filter hiding her eyes. And suddenly everything I brushed off started forming a pattern I couldn't unsee. I left the box at the back door. I didn't ring the bell again. I didn't text to say I'd come by. I just got in my car and stared straight ahead. Not crying. Not angry. Just stunned. Because I finally understood. I had been invited into their lives out of convenience. Now that my part was over, they were quietly writing me out. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted deeply, you're not alone. Tap that like button if this part hit you hard. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And have you ever faced something like this? Let's talk. The invitation never came. But I didn't expect it anymore. I held on to a small hope. Maybe they'd change their minds. Maybe he'd remember how many times I'd stayed up nursing him through fevers. Maybe she'd see how much I'd given and let me in. Instead, I got a text. 7 words. Please don't come to the baby shower. That was it. No explanation. No punctuation. No signature. Just a message that hit me harder than anything else ever had. I stared at it for minutes. Then hours. Then days. I didn't respond. What was there to say? That I was disappointed? That I felt discarded? That I had imagined decorating cupcakes and taking silly photos next to a banner that said, Grandma-to-be? No. They had already decided. And I had already been dismissed. So I put away the dress I'd bought. I folded it neatly and packed it in the back of my closet. I deleted the calendar reminder for the date. And when the day came, I sat by the window and watched the light shift across my empty living room. And I made a decision. Not with anger. Not with revenge. But with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I would no longer give where I wasn't seen. I would no longer beg for a seat at a table I paid for. I would no longer carry the weight of a family who refused to acknowledge the ground I laid beneath them. They had drawn the line. But they'd also forgotten something. They may have cut me out of their celebration. But the foundation? That was still mine. After the text about the baby shower, I stopped calling. Stopped visiting. Stopped sending things they didn't appreciate. I didn't announce it. I didn't write a dramatic message or ask for clarity. I simply stepped back. Like a ghost slipping out the side door of a room where she was never welcome to begin with. And the strangest part? No one noticed. At least, not them. Not the ones who once needed me for everything. Not the son I had raised with my whole being. Days passed. Then weeks. No calls. No texts. No how are you? I watched the seasons change through the same windows I had once stared through while holding him as a baby. And now those windows only showed me reflection. A woman disappearing in her own life. It's a special kind of ache. Being alive and yet treated like you're gone. I would hear updates from other people, distant cousins, mutual friends. They're doing well. She's glowing with pregnancy. And every time I nodded politely, my chest tightened. Because no one ever said, they were asking about you. No one ever said, your name came up. Because it didn't. Not once. My sister asked if I was going to reach out again. I smiled at her and said, why? I'm already invisible. She didn't argue. Because even she had seen it. How they had started to talk around me, not to me. How I had become an afterthought in a story I helped write. The nights were the worst. That's when the silence became loud. I'd wake up with the echo of his childhood voice in my head. I love you, Mommy. A voice that used to bring me peace now haunted me like a lullaby turned cold. And when I cried, it wasn't loud or messy. It was quiet. It was controlled. Because I was grieving. But no one had died. At least, not in the way most people think. Some people keep photo albums. I keep receipts. Literal ones. Text messages with transfer confirmations. Screenshots of Amazon orders. Email threads showing payment acknowledgments from the bank. Bank statements marked with their rent amount, over and over again. I never saved them out of pride. I saved them because part of me needed to prove to myself that it happened. That I wasn't imagining the generosity. That I didn't make it up. My name was on the deed. That was a fact. The mortgage company called me first. The insurance letters came to my address. But inside that home, I had no place. They decorated without me, furnished it with money I helped provide, then closed the doors behind me. And with every closed door, they took more. When he called to ask for help with the garage conversion, said they needed a home office, I wired the money. When they needed new tires before winter, I paid for those too. When her baby registry included designer diaper bags and smart bassinets, I checked every item off the list. Not because they asked, but because I believed, somewhere deep down, that if I kept giving, they would remember me, see me, thank me. They never did. There was never a Mother's Day flower. Not even a card. Not even a forwarded meme. On my birthday, he texted happy birthday. That was the year I stopped baking myself a cake. And yet, I still smiled at their milestones. When I saw their pregnancy photo shoot online, her in flowing lace, him behind her with his hands on her belly, I whispered, he looks happy, and meant it. Because even in all this, a mother's love doesn't vanish. It just reshapes itself into something quieter, something sadder. But still something. I found out the baby was born from Facebook. A mutual acquaintance had shared a post. Pink balloons. Tiny footprints on a card. And a caption that read, "Welcome to the world, little Ava. You are so loved." I sat there, phone in hand, the room suddenly too still. I stared at that sentence for what felt like an hour. Not a call. Not a message. Not even a one-word text. I checked my inbox just to be sure. Nothing. I checked my voicemail. Nothing. I checked my front door, for a mailed birth announcement maybe. Nothing. The silence was total. And in that silence I felt it. The final cut. The one that didn't bleed out loud, but hollowed me out completely. I wanted to buy a stuffed bear. I had one picked out. A soft brown one with a pink bow. Instead, I sat on my porch, listening to the sound of someone else's wind chimes. And I realized, they weren't going to tell me, because they didn't think I deserved to know. People messaged me, asking if I'd met the baby, if I'd held her yet. I smiled through my replies, said things like, "Not yet, they're settling in." But the truth? They had no plans for me to meet her. They had erased me from her story before it even began. And the cruelest part wasn't that I missed her birth. It wasn't that I didn't hear her cry or see her tiny face. It was knowing that one day, she would grow up not knowing me at all. Not knowing that the crib she slept in, the blanket wrapped around her, the very roof over her head, came from a woman she never met. A woman who whispered blessings to her through tears. A woman who had been written out before the first page of her life was even turned. I was erased, but I was still here. Watching, remembering, grieving, and quietly, rebuilding. There's a point in grief when the tears dry up. Not because you've healed, but because something inside you finally accepts what your heart kept resisting. That day came quietly. No dramatic music, no sudden snap. Just a morning like any other. Coffee, slippers, and silence. Only this time, I wasn't aching. I was clear. I opened the drawer beside my bed and pulled out the documents. The deed to the house. The texts I had saved. The receipts. The proof of everything I had given. I placed them all in a folder, walked to the mirror and said aloud, "Enough." Then I called my lawyer. She'd been helping me with my estate planning before everything fell apart. She was kind, efficient. She didn't ask why I changed the beneficiary of the house. She didn't ask why I updated my will. She just looked at me with soft eyes and said, "Are you sure?" And I nodded. 'Cause yes, I was sure. I didn't give the house to them. I gave it to someone else. Someone who had wiped my tears during the nights I cried in silence. Someone who brought me groceries when I had no appetite to shop. Someone who checked in without needing anything in return. A woman who wasn't related by blood, but showed more family than anyone who shared my name. When the paperwork was complete, I had the letter sent through my lawyer. A formal notice. Simple, direct, clean. Said what needed to be said. And nothing more. I didn't sign it with bitterness. I didn't lace it with threats. It wasn't revenge. Not in the way most people think. It was truth. It was clarity bound in ink. They wanted silence? Fine. But silence comes with consequences. I had been generous. I had been loyal. I had been quiet. But I had also been legally smart. And this was the moment my silence finally spoke. Sometimes silence is the loudest revenge. If you loved how she handled this part, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss what she did next. We tell stories of strong women rising from betrayal every week. The call came at 7:12 in the morning. I was folding laundry listening to the radio when my phone rang and his name flashed across the screen. I paused. I let it ring. And on the final vibration I answered. "Hello." His voice cracked. "Mom, what do you mean the house isn't ours?" I didn't yell. Didn't cry. Didn't explain. I simply said, "You never asked who it belonged to. You just assumed." He stammered something about misunderstandings, about paperwork, about timing. I waited. Then said, "I gave enough. You made your choice." He went silent. For the first time in a long time, he had no words. Later that evening she called. My daughter-in-law. Her voice was sweet. Too sweet. Syrupy and staged. We didn't mean for things to get so distant, she said. I think we should talk face to face. I said nothing. She kept going. I mean, we're family, right? That word hung in the air. Family. I almost laughed. But instead I asked one question. Where was that sentiment when you told him I couldn't come to the baby shower? She stuttered, paused, tried to deflect, and I let the silence stretch long enough to feel like truth itself. Then I said, the house is no longer your concern. Live where you're welcome. And I ended the call. There were emails after that. Voicemails filled with panic. Requests for explanations. Even a message from her mother, asking if we could resolve things amicably for the baby's sake. But I didn't respond, because they never considered my sake. Not once. They had shown me how easily they could shut the door. Now they were learning how hard it is to open one. When the lock has changed. They tried to hold it all together. Kept posting smiling pictures online. Perfect captions. Color-coordinated outfits. But something had shifted. And people began to notice. Family members started asking questions. Why wasn't your mother at the shower? Did you invite her to the christening? Isn't that her house? Rumors have a way of peeling back the gloss. They started to explain themselves. But the more they spoke, the more tangled their stories became. Her friends pulled away. His coworkers stopped commenting on their posts. And that image, their carefully crafted, classy facade, began to unravel. Because no matter how much they tried to pretend, people could feel it. The coldness, the selfishness, the emptiness that comes from trying to live off love that was never earned. They had tried to silence me, erase me, replace me, but what they failed to understand was that you can't build a life on the foundation of someone else's sacrifice, and then pretend the ground belongs to you. The baby grew. She smiled in photos I wasn't tagged in, wore clothes I hadn't bought, held toys I'd never seen. But the house, their so-called castle, was no longer their kingdom. The cracks in their story became chasms. And the truth? It crept in like a shadow across all their golden frames. They tried to make the shower look like a royal affair. But in the end, the crowns were paper. The chairs were borrowed. The smiles were forced. And the truth stood taller than any of them. They thought I would stay silent. That I would keep giving. That I would disappear quietly. But what they never realized was that silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes, it's just the sound of a storm waiting for its turn. After everything settled, after the legal letters, the phone calls, the silence, I found myself sitting in my living room, listening to the sound of nothing. But this time it didn't feel like loss. Felt like space. Space to breathe. Space to rediscover what had been buried beneath years of sacrifice. I started with the smallest things. Opening the windows early in the morning and letting the breeze fill my home. Taking long walks without needing to be anywhere. Picking up books I never had time to finish. And one day, while passing a little art studio downtown, I stepped inside. They were holding a beginner's painting class. I didn't think, I just joined, and I painted a tree with roots so deep, the canvas couldn't contain them. The instructor said, "That tree looks like it's been through something." I smiled. I said, "It has." The laughter came back too. Not all at once, but in little waves. At the grocery store when I saw a toddler throw a tantrum over broccoli. At the cafe where a barista called me queen after I tipped him with coins. I started seeing joy in the details. The way the sunlight moved across my kitchen table. The comfort of warm socks from the dryer. The scent of cinnamon tea in the late afternoon. For so long, I believed that my identity was tied to being a mother. But I had forgotten. Before I was a mother, I was a woman. A whole, breathing, dreaming woman. And for the first time in years, I was giving that woman a chance to live again. A friend from my art class told me about a local center that supported young, struggling mothers. She said they were looking for volunteers, people to talk, help organize supplies, sometimes just listen. I signed up the same day. And that's where I met her. Her name was Amina. 19 years old. Alone. Pregnant. And terrified. She reminded me of myself. The same nervous hands. The same brave smile masking deep fear. We talked about everything, naming the baby, breastfeeding, sleep schedules. But mostly we talked about being left behind. And one day she asked, "How did you do it?" I didn't have an easy answer. I just said, "One day at a time, and with love you don't have to beg for." I went home and opened that closet. The one that held the crib sheets, the baby bottles, the stroller still in its box. I didn't cry this time. I packed everything into my car. And the next day I gave it all to her. "These were meant for a baby who never knew me," I said. "Now they'll go to one who will." She cried when she saw the nursery items, held my hands like they were precious, said, "No one's ever done this for me," and I smiled because I knew, in that moment, I was a grandmother, not by title, not by DNA, but by heart. And that mattered more. I spent years being quiet, not because I didn't have thoughts, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I believed that love meant endurance, that motherhood meant swallowing pain to keep peace, that being strong meant being silent. But silence, I've learned, isn't the absence of voice. It's the presence of choice. I chose to protect myself when they didn't. I chose to let go when holding on was breaking me. I chose to say no more. Not in a scream, but in a whisper they couldn't ignore. I once believed that titles like mother and grandmother had to be earned through sacrifice. But now I know, respect must be mutual. And peace is priceless. I no longer wait for apologies. I no longer replay the betrayal in my mind. I no longer wonder why. I've made peace with the unanswered questions, with the love that wasn't returned, with the phone that never rang again. I found my voice, and I used it not to scream at closed doors, but to open new ones, to tell my story in my time on my terms. And in that, I found freedom. My son once called me dramatic, said I was overreacting, told me I was imagining things, until the day he drove past the house and saw the sold sign in the front yard. The same house he thought belonged to him, the one built on my sacrifice. That day he called. He left voicemails. He sent messages. But I didn't respond. I didn't need to, 'cause for once, he finally heard me. And I hadn't said a word.